Good morning, my gentle friends. I would like to ask you to take a nice deep breath in and make that ah sound. Really feel the texture of the breath. And be patient. Wait for just a moment. Feel the aftermath. Just that slight drop of stress. It's very small, but it is there. It's palpable, and little things make big differences. I'd like to suggest to you that over time, if you make small changes, it's like an infinite line. If you have two lines very close together, over time they expand, and suddenly you have a huge expanse. So it doesn't take. It's much easier to change than we would think. So the element I would like to touch base on today is what I call the world's largest chicken. The world's largest chicken. And that actually would have been how I have described myself in the past. I described myself as the world's largest chicken. I I grew up afraid, and when you have individuals or animals who grow up attacked often, they become, they're like deer. They have that startle reflex, and I was in that space. But I had an odd thing happen both in childhood as I got older when I would be in situations where we would suddenly be attacked by a group of people or something, but especially even beyond that, when I was first really developing my relationship to learning how to shift my own relationship to fear. I had this relationship to fear at a certain point. It made sense to me why I was afraid. I was often being chased by people or groups of people. I was often being threatened. I grew up in a situation where I was often, assailed, and it made sense. But what was really challenging for me as I grew older, as I got into college, and even after I got out of college, I might be in my apartment by myself, or I might be with my girlfriend alone, or in a movie theater, and I'd suddenly become terrified. I don't mean afraid. I would just suddenly become terrified. And it got to the point that when I began to feel that first spark of being afraid, that all of a sudden it would just ignite. I became afraid of being afraid. And then I became afraid of being afraid of being afraid. And then it just ramped all the way out. And so it seemed impossible for me. It was so powerful. It was like a god. As soon as fear would come on the landscape of my consciousness, it became my total focus. But what initially worked for me, and why I was able to eventually shift it, is I said to myself, well, me learning how to have a different relationship to this experience of being afraid is not just for me, it's also for other people. Somehow I had this idea that by learning how to not be afraid, I would be supportive of other people who were dealing with fear or uncomfortable emotions. Not just fear either, like having rageful states, things like that. And this continued on, and it progressed. And later on, when I went to and worked in mental health, when I worked in a locked mental health unit, I had this element that even though I would be afraid, I would move towards what I would be afraid of. And what I found is that I became extremely courageous. I was like unbelievably courageous, but if someone else was in danger. I would actually still be afraid if it was just me. And even when I might have to handle an aggressive person who wasn't really that much dangerous to me, I would still become afraid. However, when someone else was in danger, I would just suddenly find this expansion of power and courage and just willing to step up to anybody. Anyone who worked with me at that time can attest to that. I would be one of the first guys to deal with the most dangerous person. And so I want to tell you about a story that happened. This really happened. I'm sure that many people won't believe it, but this really happened. One time I was working with, I would often be put onto what was called a one-to-one with a very aggressive person, or maybe a very vulnerable person, or a very impulsive person. And this particular time I was with this guy, and he had to be in a room by himself, and I was with him. And a nurse came, and it was just the three of us standing there. And suddenly he doubled over, and when he doubled over, the nurse came towards him, very, very concerned, and he came up with an uppercut, and I was standing there. right there. The three of us were standing there. And all of a sudden, I can't tell you how it happened, but he came up with a strong punch. And before I knew it, my hand had caught his fist. I didn't have any sense of it. It just happened. And it was so shocking to all three of us that all three of us were sort of shocked out of the moment. We were just like, we both were just like, and it wasn't like a big explosive thing like you might think it would be, because we were all shocked out of that state. He just went back into the room, and you know, she and I were standing there, and we kind of debriefed for a moment, but we were both in shock. And so again, there's no way I could have done that. Absolutely no way. But when you really are connected to serving people or to protecting people, when you really see them in danger, you will find yourself at times being able to do things beyond your capability. Beyond your capability. I remember a story in the news. I had seen a report on the news. This is probably 20 years ago. And this was a case where a man was underneath a car fixing a car, and his young nephew was, you know, just hanging around outside, and suddenly the jack began to fail and it began to collapse slowly onto this man's chest, but he couldn't get out. This boy was like 12, 13 years old. He was skinny, and he was able to go and lift the car just enough for his uncle to shimmy out. Impossible. You'd be surprised at what you can do when you have enough of a reason to do something, when you really, really feel like someone or something is at risk, something that you feel is vital. You'd be surprised at what you can accomplish. I actually saw this, footage of this one time. Another incident occurred where a helicopter crashed, and it happened to crash upside down, and it crashed in sort of a shallow lake. And the pilot was strapped in, and he was going to drown. It was upside down, but it was this man came, and he was a big guy. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he was a really big guy. He was probably 300 pounds, but there was no way he could have lifted this helicopter. But somehow he managed to pick that helicopter up enough for someone else to get the door open and get this guy out. Impossible. You can do the impossible when you have enough of a reason. If you have a big enough lever, you can move the entire world. And I would just like to suggest that you consider creating a cosmology that gives you access to that kind of power. The truth is, I have lived with tremendous social anxieties. What I'm doing right now is completely beyond the pale for what I would have thought I would have been capable of. But I just feel such drive because I have a child, and drive because I love this world. We can step up to whatever needs to be done if we don't focus on fear and make it a god, but actually focus on what's at stake, and not in a way that enrages us, because that's just an ignition that we're out of control of. That's a fire out of control. I want to suggest, yes, we need to do whatever is necessary, but it doesn't, for me, my perception is that we have to do it calm, and we have to do it clear-eyed and be really, really present. You know, it's my perception that we want to be as mindful as possible in the process. Doesn't that make sense? Is that really what we want to do, is not really be present? Is that really what we want to do? So, as the world's biggest chicken, I want to tell you, you can do more than you could ever have imagined. You just have to be really clear that it's really needed right now. You can do this. By the way, you know, that the panic attacks I used to experience, I mean, I still manage those things. It's not like it's just gone. But remember, if you can't stop being afraid of what you're afraid of, maybe you can stop being afraid of what you're afraid of being afraid of. Or maybe you can learn how to not be afraid of being afraid of being afraid. If you keep going back far enough, you're going to get to a point where you're going to be like, I can manage this. So, thank you for your time. I see that I went much longer than I have agreed to do, but I appreciate you hanging in. Here we go. I'm going to bring my hands together as the world's largest chicken, and I want to bow to all you other chickens out there, because I know there's a lot of chickens out there, maybe even bigger than me. Maybe you're a bigger chicken than I am. A chicken, the size of a chicken is not the size of the body. But I want to bow to you, because I know that even though you deal with fear, that you have the opportunity for tremendous courage. having courage does not mean not dealing with fear. Namaste. Thank you, lovely people.